Hello, divine creations, divine marvels, children of God. Thank you so much for joining in. So, Bruno Groening said a lot, and sometimes I try and sometimes I try and sum it up in just a few words, and I don't know if it's possible. Sometimes I'll say things like Bruno Groening's entire teaching can be summed up as "we need God," or Bruno Groening really came to teach us one thing, and that's to rely on God. And all that, it's kind of a little bit of an exercise for me. Like, what's the root? What's the foundation? To try and summarize everything Bruno, taught in just a few words. And that's kind of been a little philosophical, like we need God or rely on God, or but on a practical level, if I were to try and summarize Bruno Groening's teachings, it might be something like ask for help and receive it. To be a little more thorough, I might say ask for help, believe in God, and receive God's help. And of course, there's many other nuances, like be mindful of your thoughts and separate yourself from evil. There's sort of the formal practice of Einstellen, of receiving that help. I think that's basically what Bruno Groening taught us. To ask for help, to receive it, and then a few essential parts of that process. Separating ourselves from evil, watching our thoughts, having faith in the sender of this help. And to me, it seems that, and there's a little bit more, and then to extend that help to others, or as Bruno very simply said, to do the good. Someone who I knew who's done this much longer than me, who I have a lot of respect for her level of just real trust. This person has real deep trust in Bruno. She once said, she summarized the path like this: separate yourself from what's not good. Take in the good, have faith in the good, and do the good. I think she won the Summarize Bruno Groening's Teaching contest. It's one of the best summaries I've ever heard. And I have a mind that makes things, I think a lot. I'm a thinker, for better or for worse. I reflect on things, I study things, and sometimes it's definitely for better, and sometimes it's definitely for worse. So I think that's part of why I try and find a way to just keep things simple in my own mind. And, the irony is, the beginning of this path, when I really didn't know very much about Bruno Groening's teaching, since then I've studied it quite thoroughly, and as some of you know, to the point where I'm even learning some German so I can look at it in the original. But ironically, it was at the very beginning when I knew the least. I just knew to ask Bruno for help and to tune in and to not to not to not think about the illness, to give the illness away. To view all symptoms as regular. And um, it was during that time that I really experienced the most help and healing. And in hindsight, is like I can see very clearly. Well, I didn't. There were some things that I didn't have. Some of the my understanding was definitely incomplete. Um, it was definitely inaccurate in some ways. But what I did have, I may not have had accuracy and I may not have had the full story. I definitely had, what they sometimes call as beginner's mind. Like I was just fresh and open and I had trust. I really just trusted in Bruno Groening with my heart and soul. Interestingly enough, part of what I trusted in was the organization. I learned about Bruno through the Bruno Groening Circle of Friends, and so part of my faith was rested in the organization. But regardless, I just had faith and trust. I was kind of simple. I could sort of get up and I became a community leader in the Bruno Groening Circle of Friends, and I could get up and talk. I could feel the healing stream very strongly. So maybe that was part of what helped too. But I could just get up and talk, and that's pretty much all I would say is trusting in Bruno, sharing stories of healings I'd experienced, healings I'd heard about, tuning in. And irony of ironies, I had I had definitely an incomplete picture of the teaching, and again, some of it was just bordering on inaccurate, definitely incomplete, and some pieces were inaccurate. Had a lot of help and healing, and I think even though things were incomplete, uh, some my understanding was incomplete, some things were inaccurate, that my faith was um, a little bit more too much sort of in the group, in the organization, as opposed to Bruno Groening. Regardless of all those, we could call them errors or whatever you like. I had I had the essence of it, even though I was doing the essence maybe wrong. The essence was faith and trust. The essence was exactly what Bruno Groening said the essence was. Bruno himself said, "It is written that faith can move mountains." Well, I say faith moves mountains. Only have faith. And so obviously we each have our own specific journey that takes us on twists and turns, and I have my specific journey that led me to step down from being a community leader and to really dive into studying Bruno's teachings and And according to Bruno, all of you know, those of you who have been here a while, you know, I love Bruno Groening's teachings. I love looking at them and practicing them and thinking about them and reflecting on them. And, there's this Buddhist parable that I really like where it's not a parable, it was a teaching of the Buddha. And the Buddha likened his own teaching to a raft. And he likened the spiritual journey to crossing a river. He said basically you get in the raft and you cross the river, and then when you get to the other side, you let the raft go. You don't need it anymore. You're there. Like the purpose of the teaching has a purpose. And I don't know if I resonate with that 100%, but the spirit of it, that everything Bruno Groening said had a purpose. And sort of the end goal, which I like to keep in mind, the end goal of freedom from all evil, that Bruno called it salvation or redemption. So that's like the big end goal. Can't even fathom. Can anyone here fathom what it would be like to be free of all evil? Free of all problems, all imbalances? It's difficult to imagine. So that's sort of the end game, as it were. And then I would say everything Bruno Groening did was directed towards that end game for all of us. But what's the mid game? Well, I'd say the mid game, and that which will get us to the end game, is having faith and trust in the divine power, ultimately in God, but specifically in God's ability and willingness to help. Some people focus more on God, some people focus more on Bruno, some people focus more on the energy. And depending on which day of the week, I could sort of argue for each one of those. It's like, oh, well, I think that one's better. Oh, I think that one's better. I kind of, that's still something I sit with, and I don't have clear cut. The only clear answer I have is, whichever three you feel most resonance with, or maybe even more importantly, whichever the three that you have the most trust in. Because faith or trust changes everything. And we can this very simple way to realize this. Think about a situation where just things didn't go wrong. Like you missed your train, or you missed your plane, or, you know, you had, you went on vacation and your suitcase got lost, or just anything. And, I don't like to be overly simplistic, but how we react to that, there's kind of two fundamental reactions. There's sort of freaking out, and there's just having faith and trust. Like, okay, everything's going to be okay. I might not like it. I'm not saying we should like things that don't go our way. but really trusting that everything will be okay when things don't go our way. It's a very powerful attitude. One Christian writer really, um, when speaking about the Beatitudes, he said they're the B attitudes, as in BE space attitudes, ATTITUDES. That the Beatitudes, and I would argue really Christ's teaching, and of course then Bruno's teaching, is an attitude, much deeper than an attitude, but a stance, a bottom line. There's lots of teachings out there that speak about things like love or fear. It's a very common thing you'll see in a lot of different spiritual books, a lot of New Age books that were either really coming from one of two places. And I think I don't know that Bruno ever said it like this, but I think Bruno would say it's more we're coming from faith or fear, trust or fear. And he might, I don't know if Bruno would like that way of saying it, but he definitely, no question about it, moment by moment, we're being driven by good or evil. That's really, I'd say I keep thinking, I look for all these ways to get to the bottom line. And I think that's another legitimate way of saying Bruno's summarizing what Bruno taught is that moment by moment, there's one of two forces in the universe, and moment by moment, one of two is driving us. We're either being driven by God or the devil, by thoughts primarily. Well, I don't want to say primarily, by thoughts and or by energy. You'd say things like human beings live right in between good and evil, right in between. On the one hand, the good; on the other hand, the evil or what's not good, and human beings right in between. You decide. So tuning in might start as a meditative technique, or it might start as a healing energy meditation. That's how I've sometimes described it to other people when I didn't want to go into a lot of detail. I just say, oh, it's a healing energy meditation, or it might start as a something we do for peace of mind or healthy body, and it's I believe it's a lot more deeper than that. And it isn't. It's also really simple of like moment by moment, we're being driven by good or evil. Which one are we tuning into? Bruno was pretty hardcore about that. He would say things like, "You still listen to people. You are still listening to Satan. I only listen to and follow God, which you should also strive to do." He would say things like, listen to God, follow God, be connected to God, trust in God, take in the life stream from God, be helped by God. Give yourself up to God. All right, friends. Let's do some of that now. Let's really want the good. As Bruno said, must always believe in the good, must always want it, must always affirm it, and must always stand by the good. Because he belongs to God. That is everything. And I think maybe a little bit why I struggle to, I come up with all these different ways to summarize Bruno Groening's teaching. And I think I sometimes wonder if Bruno is just using all these different things to kind of talk about the same thing. Whether, using our minds, it's like, well, connect to God is different from having faith in God, which is different from standing by God, which is different from listening to God, which is different by affirming God, which is different from receiving help from God. If we engage our minds, then, well, all those things might seem different. Maybe they're not so different. Maybe what's not important is, having a deep understanding of Bruno Groening's teachings, or any teaching really, but finding our way in, finding the words or the practice or the principle that really speaks to us, really grabs our heart and soul, and of course works for us. And just sticking with that. Namaste, Gita. Greetings, Tatiana. Ciao, Fabio. Oh. Thanks everyone for joining in. So let's spend a little time doing that. Whether you think of it as taking in the good, whether you think of it as being connected to God, trusting. Let's do that now. And so, what I invite people to do is ask or reflect what's what's your bottom line for this path? How would you express it? What's the aspect of this path that just changes everything for you? And for me, I think it's trusting in Bruno. It's I'd say trusting in Bruno with a lot of tuning in. But in terms of just, and so what's the thing that really, we have an expression in English, rocks your world? What's the teaching or the principle? What's your summary? And it doesn't have to be like the accurate summary of Bruno Groening's teaching, but what's the thing that just changes everything for you, that orients your life in the right direction? And if you want to share it, please do, and um, I'll share. I'll read them at the end. For me, I really think it's trusting in Bruno Groening, and then just doing a lot of tuning in. Thank you so much, Ulrike. She wrote, to be always in union with God, moment by moment, even sometimes without faith, as I have to admit, it is a growing and deepening process. Well, thank you for, first of all, stating the truth that the spiritual path is a growing and deepening process. And thanks for your honesty that it's not always with faith. And if there's anyone here who has perfected faith, then please start offering community hours and I'll come because I want to learn that. I don't have perfected faith by any means. And thank you, Ulrike. That's so beautiful to hear your expression of your bottom line, sort of what the essence of the path is for you. All right, dear ones. Thank you so much for joining in. Going to be doing this again in 2 hours. And then going to be doing it again at 7 p.m. tonight. Very grateful for each one of you. I hope to see and feel you all very soon. Take care. Much love.